Hello summoners and welcome back to another episode of ProGuides Best Champions to Main, now on patch 11.13. The champs we pick for the series are strong picks with high performance, but have low ban rates, and are unlikely to be nerfed anytime soon. They are reliable picks for climbing and are worth investing your time in. We also have a series that covers the most broken, contested picks in each role, so be sure you're subbed to the channel so you don't miss out when we post these as well. We'll start things out in the top lane with ORNN. If you're looking for an easy to play champ for your climb, nothing beats a tank, and ORNN is one of the best champs in the class at the moment. He's not particularly weak at any point in the game. In fact, he even wins most lanes against other melee champs in the earlier stages of the game. With how easy it is for tanks to itemize both damage and defense against their opponents with items like Sunfire and Thornmail, you'll even be able to pressure side lanes as a split pusher in the mid game. That said, champs like Fiora, Camille, and Wukong will definitely outscale you in 1v1 fights when you don't have a huge lead over them, but you aren't here to just duel your opponent all day. If you do end up in a situation where you can't take on your opponent anymore, you'll still be able to be more useful when you group up with your team. Not only does ORNN offer a ton of CC and even his unique brittle debuff, you'll also be upgrading your teammates' mythics. That way, your carries can pump out even more damage as you soak up damage as a frontliner in teamfights. Our next top laner is Pantheon. While he may not be as OP as he was earlier in the season, that actually works in your favor. He's still a really solid pick, with an especially strong laning phase, but since he's lacking in popularity, not many people are used to playing against such a high damage laner. That combined with the fact that you'll be running Ignite, means you can very easily get cheesy early kills in most games. And just picking up a single kill with him can easily lead to a very heavily snowballed lead, to the point that you can kill your opponent over and over again. Panth may not be able to block tower shots anymore, but with enough of a lead on a relatively squishy opponent, you can straight up dive them, blowing them up from 100 to 0. While it's not necessary, it's also a good idea to call your jungler to your lane to ensure that you get kills. Not only will it help you get your jungler ahead of your opposing jungler, it's also pretty tilting to get repeat ganked when you're already laning against someone as oppressive as Pantheon. Playing to tilt your opponent is more than a valid way to pick up some LP. Having a semi-global means you can use your lead to roam for your teammates. But since you're running Ignite, not TP, you should also try to keep your ganks mostly mid lane focused. Going all the way to bot lane may result in a kill or two, and even a dragon, but your opponent gets a pretty big lead of their own if they stay top for minions and plates. When you're playing Panth, you need to be ahead in the 1v1 at all stages, so giving up your lead just to put your team ahead isn't worth it at all in the end. Our last top laner for this patch is Kayle, and she's basically the polar opposite of Pantheon. Instead of playing to bully lane, your goal is to scrape by and survive to level 6. Up to that point, Kayle is basically the weakest champ in the game. You can be solo killed by just about every single meta top laner if you try to fight them. To get around this, you'll give up as much farm as you need to just not die. A really common mistake with Kayle players is using their Q to desperately try to farm, but do not do this recklessly. If your opponent is just barely last hitting and you throw out a Q, which does AoE damage, you may end up accidentally shoving in the wave. Basically, by going for just that one minion, you end up in a spot where you may not even be able to get into EXP range, let alone get any last hits. Anyways, once you make it up to level 6, and you unlock your ranged form, things get a little bit easier. You're still far off from the point where you can just commit to all-in fights, but being able to outrange your opponents mean you can go for a bit of trading here and there, and it makes farming a lot easier. As the game goes on, you want to stick yourself in side lanes, and pretty much never group until you're at least level 11 and have 2 full items. With the AoE damage from that power spike, you'll be a much more capable team fighter. Ideally, the game goes even longer, and you reach level 16. With your passive fully stacked all the time in the bonus range, this form makes you basically untouchable in team fights. You'll pretty much mow down any diver that tries to jump onto you before they can even make contact. In the current meta of aggressive junglers, strong early laners are naturally the more predominant ones. As a result, picking Kayle means you're pretty much always going to have a tough time in the first few levels, and just a single mistake, like pushing when you can't crash a wave, can be so punishing that you basically lose the game off of it. But things like wave management, trading in lane, and other concepts like that are really easy to teach. And when it comes to teaching League, no one does it better than us. With the ProGuides sub, you'll get access to all of our online courses, unlimited chats with our coaches, and if you book a session, you'll get a discounted rate too. With these resources, you'll save a ton of time by actually improving before you start grinding your face against that wall that is solo queue. And right now, we're running a great deal. Just use discount code RANKUP2021 for 20% off your sub. So don't wait, head on over to ProGuides.com for yours today. Now let's get back to the video. Taking a look now at some junglers, our first pick is Karthus. While their kit may not look anything alike, Karthus is basically a budget fiddlesticks. He's a hard farming, hyper scaling AP champ that wants to get to the mid to late game teamfights, where his massive damage can devastate the enemy team. While he may not have the overwhelming ability to fear the entire enemy team, not every champ can be a 1v5 nightmare like the Styx, but Karthus has some benefit of his own. His ult may not allow him to blink over the walls for ganks, but since it's global, you can easily turn fights in your team's favor, even when you're not in the right place at the right time. Also, no matter how fed you are as Fiddle, if you make the mistake of being caught out in the late game, he's as easy to blow up as any other squishy carry. Karthus may not be tanky, but mispositioning isn't nearly as punishable. In fact, you actually want to die, so you can make the most out of your last stand rune as you dish out damage in your passive. Just remember to ult before your window expires. If you're more the type of player to play for the team, then Nunu may be a better pick for you. In the current meta of high aggro early junglers, the super ult reliant tanks like Amumu and Sejuani don't really cut it, especially in higher levels of skill. Even once they reach level 6, their ults have long cooldowns, and the downtime between ganks basically leave the game feeling like a 4v5. But Nunu is different. He's just as or even more durable of a frontliner, but he can also provide a ton of early pressure. He may not be able to poof over a wall like Shaco, but rolling in with this giant snowball can easily lead to kills on overextended enemy laners. And unlike the aggro junglers, you'll be useful whether or not you get fed early. If you have a game where both junglers are early game focused, such as Shaco versus Kha'Zix's matchup, whoever does well early will generally be the one useful for the rest of the game. But with Nunu, you'll always be a beefy source of engage and disruption, and even have the added bonus of buffing one of your carries with his passive. Our third and final jungler for you is Warwick. He may have a pretty basic to use kit, but that simplicity is part of what makes him so good. He may not be quite as good as ganking as the other super meta picks, but he's an insanely strong duelist. Being able to win 1v1 against any other jungler means that you never have to worry about having to concede camps when your opponent's contested. I'm not saying you can totally ignore lane priority. If the enemy team has a roaming mid or support, you can fight 1v2s early game, but in a vacuum, you'll never lose a fair fight. This strong dueling comes from the crazy healing Warwick gets from his Q and his passive. As long as you're autoing something, your opponents will find it basically impossible to bring you down. A lot of lower elo players get scared when their health bar starts to drop, and immediately react by running. If you survive your opponent's initial burst, you'll pretty much always win the extended fight. So with that in mind, if you end up in an early game fight where most champs lack any types of finishing power, just keep swinging. Warwick is also one of the easiest champions to do dragon with, so try to secure them as soon as they spawn. You don't even really need your laners to have priority since you can do it solo, but make sure the enemy laners aren't in a position to roam up and check. Up next, we'll talk about some mid laners, starting off with Lux. The current mid lane meta of melee assassins may have shoved out many of the previously OP control mages like Ori and Syndra, but Lux has everything you need to survive those volatile laners. In fact, you won't just be surviving against them, you can actually be the bully in many matchups. Lux's E gives a ton of poke and wave clear, and can be frustrating to deal with for your opponent. Every time they move up to farm, you'll hit them with your E, with the slow making it hard for them to do anything back to you. In the event that they do try to look for a fight, you're able to simply throw out a Q to deal even more damage and disengage their attempt. In most melee vs melee fights, 1v1s are decided by who outplays who, which champ flashes which ability, who dodges at the right time, and so on. But when you're playing Lux against them, you don't have to worry about any of that stressful stuff. Instead of forcing kills hard, all you have to do is fish for bindings once you have your ult. The only thing is, you don't have to spam the abilities every time they're up. If there's still a wave you need to farm, and you put your Q on cooldown, that leaves a big window of opportunity for an opponent to go all in for the kill. But once you do shove in that wave and your opponent is farming underneath the tower, you can freely try to land one. Worst case scenario, you miss and you back off till your cooldowns are back up. Outside of lane, you'll keep playing for snares, in choke points or over the walls when other teams don't have vision of you. As far as their build goes, the one we gave is for the maximum one-shot potential, but if you're against a champ like Zed or Shaco, it's not always optimal to go full glass cannon. In those games, pick up a Zanya second instead of Magi's, so you don't overinvest in your stacks. Our second mid laner is Annie. Just like Lux, Annie is one of the more standard AP mages that was able to survive the meta swap this season. In lane, having the ability to stun and shield herself means she can stand up to even return more damage against aggressive opponents. And having reliable CC pre-6 means that you can also work with just about any jungler to heavily punish laners that just don't know when to back off. I can't emphasize that part enough. If your laner is pushing, communicate with your jungler how easy the kills are to get. So many times I see people type things like X champions at my tower all game, but I don't get ganks. But I almost never see those people actually communicating anything before they start crying. Anyways, aside from ganks coming to you, you'll always want to abuse Annie's burst damage and CC post 6 by roaming when you can't reliably get kills in your own lane. Bot dives are particularly easy, since you'll be out leveling them and bot laners in general are pretty squishy. Once you get to that later stages of the game, be sure to work with your teammates to secure vision control. Annie's E may help close the gap a bit, but when the enemy team has vision of you, it's pretty easy to stay out of your range, especially when you don't have flash. If you can clear all their wards, the only way they can re-establish vision is by potentially walking right into you, which may just end up in a game-deciding ace. It's pretty common to hear the phrase 200 years as a meme referring to the overloaded, ultra OP champs that come out nowadays in League. But Annie is proof that simple kits can be plenty strong too. And she's not an exception to the rule. Plenty of older basic champs take top spots on our list all the time. And that brings us to our question of the day. What other older simple champs do you consider really strong or OP? Let us know your answer down in the comments below. Now without further ado, let's get back to the video. Our last mid laner is Corki. He's definitely more of a scaling pick with much less impact on how the game goes in the early stages than our last two champions. But he has an insane hyper carry potential. If you like playing champs out for 25 to 30 minutes every time, he's the pick for you. And while I did say he has less impact on the early stages, that's a bit of a generalization. Anytime his package is up, you have the potential to make some type of roaming play happen. As with most roaming champs, you'll generally look to make these plays happen bot lane. But don't totally neglect top lane. The immense slow from the package trail pretty much guarantees a kill on any immobile champ. So try to gank any laner that doesn't have their flash ready. Anyways, when you're not going for package plays, stick to farming up in the early to mid game. Once you have your Essence Reaver and Mirror Mana comes online, you'll definitely have a decent damage output, but you're still just a marksman. You may beat an assassin in long-term DPS, making you a better team fighter, but mostly 1v1s will be decided within just a few seconds as they burst you down. So with that in mind, when you're side laning, just play to soak up farm and back off, waiting for your team to actually look for fights. Once you reach Shield Bow and Infinity Edge, things change quite a bit. Corki's burst damage at that point is pretty much equal to that of the assassins you previously had to run away from, so you can generally take them down in the side lanes now. That said, you're still vulnerable to multi-man ganks, so you should just be playing like a normal marksman in most cases, grouping up and mowing down the enemy team in 5v5 fights. Moving things down to the bot lane, our first pick is Sivir. Sivir seems to bounce back and forth quite a bit between the lethality build and the crit one, and today we're going with the former. It's just performing a bit better, but both are honestly fine. I'm a bit curious which build our Sivir players prefer, so whether you dabble in Sivir or main her, let us know which build you prefer down in the comments. Anyways, Sivir is just a really solid choice for players that like to be self-sufficient marksmen. Her Q and W give her really strong pushing power, and once you have some levels and a couple of items, you practically instantly delete minion waves. Having instant wave clear means less time sitting around, clearing waves, which means less time you're vulnerable to being ganked. On top of that, having a spell shield means you're pretty much immune to being flash hooked, or otherwise caught out in situations where other ADCs would be doomed. The lethality build also means you don't need to really get in the way of danger to dish out your damage. You can also just sit back and throw out your hard-hitting poke from basically half the screen away. Our second bot carry is Ashe. Surprisingly, Ashe isn't too popular right now, but we think she's actually one of the best bot lane carries you can go with, especially if you aren't the type of player that needs to be an absolute 1v9 superstar. She may not have over the top DPS that Jinx or Vayne has, but she still has some of that highest damage output in the game. She's also a lane bully, with pretty much no losing lanes against any other marksman, and offers a ton of utility, so I think she can settle for being just a bit lower in damage than more popular hyper carries. In lane, you'll use her high range to punish your opponents anytime they move up, using the slow to escape if they ever try to trade back on you. In the earlier levels, W has a fairly long cooldown, but it still gives some extra pushing power and poke, but it really starts to get annoying for the other bot lane to deal with once you get more points in it, with it having a 4-second cooldown at max rank. At this point, you'll be constantly shoving in your opponent and spamming your poke, forcing them to take damage anytime they want to move up to last it. This is oppressive on its own, and even more so when you pair Ashe with a poke support like Zyra or even MAOKAI with his saplings. Out of lane, you'll have a bit more proactivity than most other ADCs. Instead of always waiting around for your team to do things, you can use your ultimate to make picks and initiate fights. With its low cooldown, you should play with the mindset of you miss every shot you don't take. If you miss, or it's just not a target your team can follow up on, worst case you can just wait a short bit before it's up again. Our last bot lane champ for you is Ziggs. Mages are generally much stronger laners than ADCs, since they can bypass the 2v2 aspect of the lane by just shoving in waves and poking rather than directly fighting. This can also give a more consistent feel than most ADCs that are practically forced to work with supports to actually play out the lane. So if you're fed up with your unlucky supports, consider swapping to him as your main. While Ziggs is known for his ability to infinitely clear waves like all mages, You can't just start off the lane phase by spamming Qs from level 1. Play the first few levels kind of slow, and once you fully stack Mana Flow Band and finish Lost Chapter, you'll have the sustain to spam away. At this point, your basic game plan is to shove the enemy under tower, poke them while they try to farm, use passive autos on towers for bonus damage, rinse and repeat. There are a couple of nuances to this. If the enemy jungler isn't accounted for, you'll want to play a bit more back. You can still go for poke on the enemy bot lane, but you don't want to step all the way up to auto range to hit the tower. Just play back and make the AD carry play dodgeball. And when you're laning against kill lanes, you'll also want to keep your distance. Someone like Thresh or Blitz can easily be disengaged with your satchel charge, but someone like Leona or Nautilus can just throw their ults out, locking you down and blowing you up. As far as this build goes, if you need a Zhonya's in your build, you'll probably need it early. So go ahead and pick it up either right before or right after Horizon Focus. If you don't need it, Lich Bane gives you insane damage against towers. Since other items give you better damage on your poke, we suggest you get it at the end of your build. Rounding out our list, we have our supports. Starting off with SORAKA. While aggro supports are definitely getting more attention in pro play, the majority of solo queue games have been more passive supports like Lulu, Senna, and Janna. In lanes like that, we highly recommend the Aerie page we gave her. But if you do end up against a dangerous kill lane, feel free to swap to the Guardian page for some added safety. Anyways, playing SORAKA requires you to be a bit more proactive in lane than other enchanters. I mean, optimally. All support players are being at least a bit proactive. Janna players should be going for W poke, Karma should be trying to land mantra Qs, and Namis should be going for W bounces for poke and sustain at the same time. But at the same time, those champs can sit back and play defensively and just keep their ADC alive. But with SORAKA, you pretty much need to move up and play aggressive. If you just sit back using your heal on your ADC, you end up draining your own HP to the point that you yourself have to go back for a reset. Landing your Q not only massively lowers the health cost, but it also gives you and your ADC a heal over time effect. And you'll actually be interacting with the enemy bot lane, so your ADC doesn't feel like they have to play a 1v2. Our next support is MAOKAI. Like SORAKA, we're going with a bit of a greedier rune page here as the default. Comet and Scorch gives a lot more poke with your saplings, and you don't get much value out of Aftershock against the more common supports in the current meta. The times you go for all-ins, more damage is better than more resistance against the lower threat lanes. And also like SORAKA, you still want to swap to a more defensive rune page if you end up against kill lanes where you're forced to serve as a meat shield for your ADC. An important aspect of bot lane is bush control. Whichever supports can push the other out of the bushes generally exerts more pressure on the enemy ADC, since they have to walk past the bushes to move up for farm. With MAOKAI's saplings, you'll control the brushes without even having to directly fight the other support yourself. If they try to move in, they get met with an angry baby tree, and take a pretty hefty chunk of damage. This just gets worse and worse as you put more points into the ability, and by the time you're level 9, just a couple of bush saplings is enough to chunk out even the tankiest supports, putting them under half HP and leaving them in no condition to look for a fight. If a squishy opponent, any ADC, gets close to a brush, but is just outside of the sapling's range, you can also look for an all-in on them. Just go for a flash W on them and instantly ignite them, and move behind them to Q them towards the sapling. Once the sapling connects, this combo is easily enough to bring down any target to near death. All you need is a bit more follow-up from your ADC and you'll have a netted free kill. Out of lane phase, MAOKAI doesn't quite have the hard engage that other CC supports like Leona and Nautilus do, but the amount of control the saplings bring is well worth it. You'll walk into the enemy jungle, spam saplings in every brush, making the entire quadrant a minefield. Anytime the enemy team wants to establish vision in that side of the jungle, or push their wards all the way up to Baron or Dragon, they have to risk losing a third of the health to do so. Kiting the saplings is possible, but when they're wasting several seconds for every single one they run into, basically, once you get map control as MAOKAI, it's very hard for your opponent to get the ball back in their court. Finishing off our list, we have Bard. He's been at or near the OP tier for pretty much the entire season, and that's no different on this patch. The nerf he got on 11.10 may have hit his damage just a bit, but that simply isn't enough to change how broken Bard is. He's just way too well-rounded of a champion. His laning is strong, his roams are godly, and his ult gives him a huge cash potential and the ability to save allies that are caught in sticky situations. You can even use the stasis to deny a Rift Herald charge, effectively denying the enemy team a kill's worth of gold. But the most broken part about Bard's kit is his E. The ability to open up portals right through terrain means that anytime your enemies step out of their turret range, they are instantly considered overextended. Everyone knows how to play safe around walls when the enemy jungler is Rek'Sai or Fiddlesticks, but no one expects Diana or Nunu to just tunnel in and kill them. But with Bard, that's a possibility, and it's a play you should try to make happen as often as possible. It's not always easy to get your team to work together in solo queue, but if you find a cooperative bunch, you can easily set up a 4-man dive bot as well. Just call your mid and jungle down. Set up a portal to the enemy tower and throw out your ult to disable the turret. Just be sure you're not unintentionally saving the enemy with your ultimate. And that is it for our top 3 champs to main on 11.13. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to sub so you never miss out on our meta guides, so you're always in the loop on what the best picks are. Remember to let us know which simple champ you think is OP down in the comments below. And one last thing, we're doing an RP giveaway. If you're interested, all you have to do is sub to the channel and join the Discord. You can find the link for that down in the description box below. I can't wait to see you guys back for the next video, but until then, good luck on the Rift, stay safe, and wash those hands. Goodbye.